Europe has entered a new geopolitical era. Enlargement, security, and resilience are no longer separate debates, they are the same conversation. Welcome to InvigoratEU Talks, a podcast series born from a major EU-funded Horizon research project, bringing together leading scholars and policymakers from across Europe to do exactly what the name suggests: re-invigorate EU enlargement and neighbourhood policy in a changing world. I am Mariam Khotenashvili, Executive Director of TEPSA, the Trans-European Policy Studies Association. In this fourth episode, we ask, what are Russia and China actually trying to achieve in the Western Balkans and in the Eastern neighbourhood? And how does that affect candidate countries' democracies and their European path? I'm joined by Marko Todorović, researcher at the European Policy Center in Belgrade and lead author of the InvigoratEU report on Russia's ambitions and leverage in the region. Alongside him is Matteo Bonomi, senior fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Rome, co-author of that same report and lead author of the report on China's influence in the Western Balkans and Eastern neighbourhood. And I'm delighted to welcome Thijs Reuten, member of the European Parliament from the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, who brings the political and legislative perspective on EU enlargement, foreign interference, and Ukraine's accession path. Marko, there is a counterintuitive finding in your report. You say Russia's political and economic influence has been declining across the Western Balkans and the Eastern neighbourhood, but its societal influence has stayed strong, even grown in places. How do you explain these findings? I'm asking because we are in the fifth year of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, and that's about as extreme a form of coercion as it gets. Georgia, another candidate country, has fallen back to Russia's orbit. Serbia is heavily influenced by Moscow. So how do we square the notion of declining Russian influence with that? What is the foreign interference index actually measuring?
So let me start with explaining what the index actually measures, and then I will come back to the specific case of Georgia. So it's important to highlight that the index is designed to capture the influence in peacetime. So it's impossible to measure the extreme coercion level such as this one seen in Ukraine. And when we talk about, for example, the foreign influence of Russia in Ukraine, we talk only about the influence in Ukraine-controlled territories. The index captures not the ambition of Russia to interfere, but basically its result, whether it is successful in its interference, and we measure it in three different spheres: political, economic, and societal. In this research, we found out that after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia's political and economic influence declined across the region, but of course not everywhere, and not everywhere at the same speed. On the other hand, societal influence either remained the same or even increased in some cases. And if we want to explore the reasons why this is like this, so in the sphere of politics, for an EU candidate country, it became too politically costly to be seen as an ally of Russia. So even countries that had a strategic partnership with Russia, such as Serbia, started distancing themselves from Russia. So although Serbia did not introduce sanctions to Russia, it definitely decreased its level of cooperation, as seen in, for example, decreased official visits or stopping buying weapons from Russia, stopping joint military exercises with Russia. And if we talk about the economy, Russia just simply has less capacity than before. Because of sanctions and because of the war spending, Moscow cannot invest money or cannot buy infrastructure or run any kind of economic diplomacy that it used to do. And in societal sphere, the picture is a bit different because it does not need to invest much. It just needs a narrative, and it needs a country's vulnerability, which might be, for example, polarized media, identity questions, some historical trauma, and that's something which Russia can do very effectively right now. And now, just to answer your question about Georgia. So as I told, these findings are a regional trend, but not a universal law, because Georgia is a case where this regional pattern doesn't hold. And it's interesting to see that even in the Georgian case, the societal sphere is also very important. So we might not expect that Georgians are fond of Russians and of Russia, and they are basically not. But the Russian disinformation campaigns do not ask for Georgians to love Russia, but their messaging there is directed and calibrated so that it captures different things. So, for example, Russian disinformation campaigns will talk about Western decadence, or they will frame civil society actors as foreign agents. They will scare people that a new war might happen in Georgia if it becomes more pro-European. So all these narratives helped the ruling pro-Russian coalition to gain and consolidate power, and these political elites in Tbilisi are close to Russia mostly for their private economic reasons.
Mr. Reuten, Marko's report describes in detail how Russia is actively using political infiltration, economic coercion, and societal engineering to destabilize the neighborhood. And is tailoring, as Marko just mentioned, its actions to each country's specific vulnerabilities. The EU's approach, by contrast, is built around acquis compliance and reform benchmarks. Is this enough? Is EU enlargement strategy actually an effective counterweight to Russia's destabilization efforts?
The easy answer would be we'll have to find out. But I think it is important to distinguish between what has to be done to fulfill the criteria for enlargement and accession, but also what we can do and what we should do next to that. Basically, no regret, in my opinion, because since we are not sure when exactly certain candidate countries will enter, I think it's important that we, regardless of the progress in the accession, we invest in countering disinformation, countering undue influence, countering also especially these societal narratives that actually have an impact also on the accession process, but have a deeper impact because if we acknowledge that for a while, not all the candidate countries will join at the same time or relatively soon, we also need a backup strategy to make sure that these countries, regardless of the membership status, remain close to our bloc, to our way of life, so to speak. And in that regard, there is reason to worry, especially about the second part of Marko's explanation, the still persistent societal influence that has a impact also on the absorption capacity, if you want, of the different societies, of the reforms, of everything that needs to happen. Because one of these stories, one of the narratives that Russia is actively pushing, and that also their cronies are actively pushing in candidate countries, is they don't want you. They want you to do all kind of things, but ultimately they will refuse you. They will not take you serious as a potential member, and that is something we need to fiercely counter.
Do you think EU's accession path, as it's currently designed, its methodology, the unanimity requirement actually enables us to counter that narrative effectively?
But that is a whole different story. I mean, I have my ideas about what should change in the way we approach accession. I called repeatedly the past year, at least, for the utmost creativity. Not saying that we have to set aside the criteria or whatever, but more creativity, more different pathways towards the same goal. That in itself is not enough to do all the countering of disinformation. And that's why the European Union also, membership trajectory or not, has concerted efforts. A good example is what we did together with the Moldovan government in terms of countering disinformation and helping them with the destabilization effects of these campaigns during their elections. I think still that we also can learn a lot from many of the countries such as Moldova, because it's not a one-way thing. We help you. No, we learn also from how they. I can also mention the case of Romania, which is an EU member state, obviously, but we need to learn from each other and reinforce these efforts regardless of the membership. And the accession path itself is not enough. Next to that, next to what I just said, we need to develop more and creative narratives. I just said this plenary also in one of the debates that member states should stop ignoring non-papers and creative ideas. They should actually start to develop credible accession paths for already countries that are already for a long time in the waiting room, but also for countries like Ukraine, because we need an acceleration in a responsible way, but we need more creativity and more commitment.
Matteo, Marko has described how Russia is deliberately engineering instability in the neighborhood. Now, your report on China tells a different story. No grand regional strategy, but a deep targeted engagement in specific countries, especially in Serbia. So, is China playing a fundamentally different game than Russia? And to what extent are they helping Russia succeed in the neighborhood?
Russia and China see the region through completely different strategic lens, and even if sometimes their interests may align, for Russia, it's its immediate surroundings and its existential and its relationship, its imperialistic agenda towards its surrounding have become really functional of the same survival of Putin's regime. For China, it's a completely different story, and China is in a completely different position. The region are part of much bigger global strategy and of a much longer game. And in this respect, China has the luxury to be able to differentiate, to see opportunity where, and to get the opportunity where it can, and to wait and to have a different differentiate approach to different country. And as you mentioned, for sure, Serbia emerged as one of the Chinese champion in the region, probably together with Hungary. Especially in recent years, they have been among the top receiver of FDI greenfield in Europe, while other countries in the region, this potential of cooperation with China has not really materialized. So we see also the difference between China and Russia in China's approach to enlargement. They are not necessarily against. On the contrary, maybe they can foresee also positively that some champion of theirs will become a EU member in the future.
Marko, you call this a paradox. Russia losing its other tools, but doubling down on societal disruption instead. Firstly, could you describe a bit how do they do it? And if that's the real fallback strategy, does the EU's democracy support even then target the right thing? Because the EU's democracy support is still built mostly around the rule of law and institutions. So what will be your take on this?
So if we talk about how Russia does that, we need to acknowledge a clear asymmetry here, because Russia isn't bound by any truth. It can manufacture anything, any narrative, while on the other side, the EU works differently. Strategic communication of the EU is always fact-checked, it's always deliberate, it's always very cautious. And I think that we should not see that as a weakness of the EU, but because I don't really think that the answer is for the EU to lower its standards and to start playing the same game. However, it seems that the current toolkit that the EU is using is just not sufficient. Of course, the rule of law and independent institutions are long-term foundation for resilience, and of course that they do build resilience over time. But the problem we are having is time frame, because institution building, the rule of law building is slow by design, and the societal disruption that Russia is producing is at fast pace. So the EU basically needs also a second track that operates on a much shorter cycle and that is running in parallel with these institutional responses. So concretely, I would highlight two things that the EU could do. So first, the EU is already doing it, but it should definitely decisively increase its investment in independent media, in civil society, universities, schools, and all those local actors that are basically capable of pushing back on disinformation in their own language in real time. And second, which might be less comfortable to the EU, I think that the EU has also to learn to actually talk to more conservative audiences in the societies of the Western Balkans and Eastern Trio. So that means that the EU should take Russian narratives seriously enough to study them properly and to address them in advance, not reacting defensively and not ignoring them. So, for example, if Russian narratives goes that the EU threatens family values, the answer shouldn't be just silence, but the EU should showcase real examples how strong pro-family policies in EU member states are. So myth busting should be the focus of the EU. So basically, just to sum up, yes, the EU does the right thing. It targets the right thing in targeting the rule of law and the institution building, but it also should to strengthen its short-term communication strategies.
Mr. Reuten, in the process of EU enlargements, there's one tension that keeps coming up. Candidate countries face growing disinformation and foreign interference, but some of the countermeasures can sit uneasily with democratic principles. Russia is very good at exploiting this, painting anti-disinformation efforts as democratic backsliding. So how should the EU strengthen democratic resilience without undermining the democratic principles it is trying to protect?
I think that, first of all, we have to be more confident and more fearful also in the myth busting. I also use the word pre-bunking, because I think that when you are debunking a narrative that is already entered into the society, it's sometimes more difficult and more costly to intervene. So we need to be ahead of the things. And indeed, as was just said also, institutional reform, for example, is not the right tool for that, because it's notoriously slow. Building these institutions, these resilient institutions, is not keeping pace with the actual effect of the disinformation. So I think that we need indeed have this double strategy, and I think we also have to become more confident. I mentioned it already. Confidence is probably the most scarce capability that we are in search of, because indeed we sometimes choose to stay silent, choose to think, okay, if we just simply don't react, then it might pass. The lesson that we need to draw from the past is that it will not. And the last point is that, also linking to what was said before about investing also aside of all the accession efforts and the accession paths, to invest in independent media, to invest in civil society. We are trying to push the Commission also to free larger parts of these budgets, of the growth plan, as exactly for that pending goal of increasing the societal resilience within the societies. And the second benefit of that is that we could also probably have better access to these more conservative parts of the population, which is now virtually impossible, because yes, in Serbia, for example, I can speak to N1, but I do not reach all Serbian people with that. And the same, for example, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where it's very difficult to get through to people in Republika Srpska, whom I love to talk to, because I'd love to talk also to these more conservative audiences about their interests. And I think that we need to become more confident also on that in that regard.
Matteo, coming back to China, is China's influence actually bigger in perception than in reality? Or are we underestimating it? And is there any evidence that Russia and China are actually coordinating, or at least reinforcing each other in the neighborhood? Or are they more like rivals who happen to be operating in the same space and sometimes stepping on each other's toes?
In politics, often perception is reality, unfortunately. And even if our data really show that often Chinese investment have not materialized, it does not mean that their political implications are not relevant. And of course, a lot depends from local political dynamics and local expectation of political leader and their entrepreneurship, let's say. that often they see China as a way to differentiate their political risk, to have diverse investment in their country. And of course, China represents an opportunity for them. The story that is told by our index tells that in the last 10 years, there were big expectations toward China in many countries, and not always these expectations were fulfilled and materialized. So there was some disappointment in some of these countries regarding China, but Serbia and few others. Of course, this does not mean that in the future it will remain the same. And of course, China has the potential and the economic potential to reach any of these countries and make a massive investment. And of course, then a political leader, especially when they diverge from the EU, will search China as a way to differentiate the political risk. And to a certain extent, we have seen, for instance, how in recent years, also, for instance, North Macedonia have tried to differentiate its investment, getting this big loan from Hungary, but probably originated from China. And it is clear sign of this game. So not all these investment materialized in the past, but in politics, perception and future possibility are much more important than the past. And regarding your question on Russia, of course, we should not overestimate coordination between China and Russia, on Ukraine especially. And this partnership is becoming increasingly asymmetrical. Russia needs China much more than China needs Russia. And of course, China has been fundamental for Russia to resist in this world, for its trade, its energy market, and for its diplomatic effort and so on. But I wouldn't take for granted that their objectives are exactly the same. Maybe China does not necessarily has as an objective that Russia win this war. Maybe for China is enough that they do not lose, or that they endure as long enough to diverse our efforts and our attention from other parts of the world.
Marko and Mr. Reuten, actually, you both referred to the time frame in your answers. And Marko said it very well, that you need second track running on shorter cycle. And if I'm correct, Mr. Reuten, you said something similar in the sense that you called for thinking outside of the box, for more creative solutions on the path of Ukraine's membership to the European Union, while obviously the membership is an ultimate goal. So my question to the two of you, if you could answer shortly, would be what would be that second track? And for you, Mr. Reuten, what would be those creative ways of dealing with Ukraine?
When we talk about the second track, I try to give a concrete example. So about creating narratives that are close to conservative audiences in the Western Balkans, but we can also talk about some more institutionalized way of a second track that could be more result-oriented and short-term oriented. For example, we have good examples in Moldova or also in Armenia when it comes to EU support in electoral campaigns, in countering Russian disinformation. So those are some successful stories of the EU in recent years.
What is the good news is that accession is back on the agenda. I mean, it's just 2 years ago that I was even laughed at when I said that I want 2 or 3 countries joining before 2030 as a signal that we are going to finish this project, as a signal to the cynics who want to see us fail, like, for example, Putin and others. But in order to achieve that, we need to, of course, facilitate those countries like Montenegro and Albania who are on track to make it on their own merit in the current process, but also to stop business as usual. And that's why I'm very critical of certain member states, because they are in the business of tanking all kind of proposals. We have had the reversed accession proposal. Okay, maybe there's a lot to say about that, but they just ignored it or turned it down without presenting an alternative. So my new slogan is, don't tank creative proposal if you don't have something better instead. And now the new approach is the enhanced gradual accession, and again more a solution agnostic. I don't care anymore how we are going to do it, but we have to realize that we are running out of time. We cannot do this with a 10-year or 15-year time frame. That goes for the Western Balkan region, which we have made a long-standing promise of integration, but it also goes for different reasons and for different arguments for Ukraine and Moldova in this regard. And as you know, I'm a strong proponent of Ukraine's membership, but we need to understand that we are running out of time and do not have the luxury to sit back and just tick the boxes of criteria. We need more commitment.
Last question. It's a complicated question. What is the single biggest blind spot, in your view, in how the EU responds to Russian and Chinese influence in these regions? Matteo, if you'd like to start with China, please go ahead.
The most important thing is transparency of Chinese investment in the region. Really, every country does not provide enough publicity and accountability of their deal with China. And there is a big competition among countries. And the end of the story, the result is fragmentation and lack of coordination among our neighboring country and the EU. And of course, together we could set standard that we could also ask China and impose China, and it's not they maybe could accept. So this fragmentation makes to them too easy to set their condition for the investment, and this is not necessary.
If we talk about especially Russia, I would say that the EU can be very good at responding once the crisis is at the door. For example, in those election campaigns in Moldova and Armenia, where the EU really assisted the governments to counter disinformation. But where the EU is much weaker is spotting the ground being prepared years in advance. So that was the case in Georgia or in Serbia, where Russian disinformation has been happening for many years, and the EU's response was quite behind.
I can subscribe to both points, both blind spots that were mentioned by Matteo and Marko. I would add another one, and that is our biggest weakness, blind spot, if you want, is that we do not use our power as a bloc. Because if we operate as a bloc, both on enhancing transparency and making sure that we present the better alternative, so to speak, to strangle loans from China or proposals from Russia, and indeed also the leaving behind us the naivety. I mean, we come from 2008 in Georgia, 2014 with Crimea. This is going on so long, and we need to respond faster, learn our lessons faster, and operate as a bloc, because together, including with the potential candidate countries, we can withstand all the challenges, I think, that we are facing. But we need to understand that time is running out and that we need to operate from unity.
Thank you very much for this conversation. What comes through today is that Russia's and China's influence in the region isn't disappearing. It's perhaps shifting shape. And in addition to outright military aggression against Ukraine, it's moving into society, media, elite networks in ways that are sometimes harder to see and sometimes harder to counter. And as we've heard, the answer isn't just about tracking that influence better or debunking myths. It's about making sure the EU's own response, its security assistance, democracy support, its accession process, its credibility keeps pace with how the threat itself is changing. This was InvigoratEU Talks. Thank you very much, Marko Todorović. Thank you, Matteo Bonomi. Thank you, MEP Thijs Reuten. And thank you all for listening. This episode is brought to you by TEPSA, and it's part of the InvigoratEU project funded by the European Union.